This is the American Law Journal.
What's killing our democracy? Why is there so much anger in American politics? Perhaps it boils down to one word: gerrymandering. Good evening, I'm Christopher Naughton. This is the American Law Journal, and our political standard is one person, one vote, where voters choose their legislators. But in the last generation, has the opposite been true? Gina Passarella with ALM explains.
I'm gerrymandering, and I approve this message. And I'll bring change and hope or whatever by picking my voters and redrawing district maps to ensure I always get reelected. Heck,
our anger at politics is real.
We live in a society where the people fear the government when the government should fear its people.
People might not say, I'm mad and gerrymandering is the reason, or I'm mad we need redistricting reform, but the things they tend to be mad at are things that gerrymandering produces.
And what's making us angry is something most of us don't even understand.
What do you think about gerrymandering?
I think gerrymandering's a great guy.
Gerrymandering is a very insidious, horrible thing for democracy because it encourages extremes on both sides of the political spectrum.
So I wouldn't say redistricting is killing our democracy. Gerrymandering, I think, is a big threat to our democracy.
In a word, gerrymandering is redistricting gone haywire, where state legislators unfairly redraw voting maps to favor their own party in state and federal elections. It goes back to early America when Virginia Governor Patrick Henry finessed redistricting to pit James Madison against James Monroe. It didn't work. Madison won and eventually became our fourth president. And later, Massachusetts Governor Elbridge Gerry approved this controversial district map, known as the Dragon, and a twisted strategy was given its name, much of which causes the public's eyes to glaze over. But it's become so critical, news programs, TV talk shows, even comedians are taking it seriously.
What are we looking at here?
We are looking at a blow-up of Cumberland County. There's no rational reason for these arms that come out and stick out all over the place. I wish we could go back to the time when the voters chose their legislators instead of legislators choosing their voters through the redistricting process.
Constitutionally, districts are supposed to be compact and contiguous. But more and more, it's anything but. Is the nation serious about getting rid of its gerrymandering hangover?
You're bluffing.
The solution to gerrymandering is that people have to care more about their state representatives, because whichever party controls the state legislature, for the most part, gets to control the boundaries. And who draws the boundaries really decides who gets elected to Congress and to state legislatures.
But at the end of the day, in 2021, we're going to be faced with having to draw new lines for our state legislature and Congress. We got to fix the process. We've got to get it right.
So vote for me, gerrymandering. Probably definitely running unopposed.
As Americans lament the gridlock in Congress and Washington, D.C., they may have gerrymandering to blame. Despite any laudable goals about redistricting, many point to it as the cause of the increased polarization in our politics, law, and the courts. For the American Law Journal, I'm Gina Passarella.
All right, when Zach Galifianakis talks about something serious, maybe it is about something serious. Three guests with me on the set tonight, and we'll also be joined in just a few moments by two politicians, one a Democrat, one a Republican, who want to end gerrymandering. A little bit later in tonight's program, we'll let you know what you do if you're going to be turned away at the polls. But joining us for the first time tonight is Rajiv Parikh. He hails from the corporate defense firm of Genova Burns. And Rajiv has also spent a good deal of time litigating cases that are election related. Matt Scoble joins us tonight from Common Cause, a nonpartisan grassroots advocates group. And he is an attorney who specializes in election protection and voting rights matters across the country. And George Beatty joins us. We know him for his personal injury and workers' comp work, but George actually ran for Congress in 2012 in what the Washington Post called one, if not the most, gerrymandered district in the entire nation, the 7th Congressional District in Pennsylvania. So you may have missed some of the political commentary and commercials that ran in this election season. Take a look.
As your representative, I pledge to eliminate competition in elections. I'll eat away at voter rights by redrawing district maps. I can even draw lines to carve out families and neighborhoods who might vote against me. Isn't that super cool? My opponents might say that drawing district lines like this undermines the fairness of our democracy. It eliminates electoral competition, and it denies the rights of voters from every political party. Anyway, check out this tractor.
All right, so check out this tractor. Matt, we've always had gerrymandering in this country. What's different today? Why does it seem to be on the front burner almost everywhere?
I think over the past decade, technology's improved so much that now political parties and political analysts can get down to such a granular level that they can pick and choose their voters all the way down to households, individual households, to ensure that they can keep their incumbency in their position.
So Rajiv, how do we get here? I mean, is it more than technology? And we're going to touch on that tonight. But it seems to be a lot worse, is it? Or is it just perception?
Yeah, no, I think it is a lot worse. I think you see a partisan divide around the country, and you see it in the national elections, you see it in local elections. And I think that partisan divide, accompanied with all of the big data that we have that political parties are using, micro-targeting, these other things, has given them the belief that they have an opportunity to gain a political advantage using information that didn't previously exist.
Let's take a look at George Beatty's district. That, again, he ran in 2012. And George, here's what your district looked like in 2002. That looks pretty compact and contiguous. Here's what it looks like in 2012. The Washington Post, again, called this goofy kicking Daffy Duck. I actually think it looks more like the Energizer Bunny. But that's what you had to fight against.
It's simply outrageous, and it's bad for democracy. It's bad for our nation, whether you're on the Republican side or the Democratic side. It forces the candidates to an extreme. So if it's a safer Republican district, it forces that Republican to go far to the right because he or she is more afraid of a challenge from the base than from the other party. Conversely, with the Democratic side, the same thing. It forces this polarization, and we've seen discord in Washington and in Harrisburg like never before.
Right, and that's exactly what's happened, Rajiv. Right. We're really seeing, the real election takes place in the primary.
That's exactly what I was thinking, which is that primary elections have become so well funded and and have become really what ultimately chooses who it is that's going to be elected for that position. And essentially what you've done is you've neutralized the ability of the voters collectively, whether Democrat, Republican, or otherwise, because of only a primary process.
Look what happened not that long ago, frankly. You had Eric Cantor. He was the majority leader of the United States House of Representatives. He was way up there, right under the Speaker of the House, as a Republican, and he faced a primary challenge from a far right-wing Tea Party Republican who beat him in a primary. When has that ever happened in American politics?
And it becomes a cyclical issue where, because you have more extreme people that are being elected, they then continue this process of extremism in terms of political ideology, and it's created logjams in the federal government and local governments around the country.
Well, joining us from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania tonight at the state capitol is Senator Lisa Pascola. She has been representing citizens there in Pennsylvania in the 18th Senatorial District since 1994, and seated next to her is Representative David Parker, elected in 2014 to serve the citizens of the 115th. And while it's always refreshing to see a Democrat and a Republican sit down and talk about almost anything, but especially gerrymandering, the question I have is, why now? Why so late? And have we been ignoring the state constitution of Pennsylvania, like a lot of state constitutions across this country have probably been ignored when it comes to gerrymandering?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, that's why Representative Parker and I are introducing this, because we formed a bicameral, bipartisan work group on what we do about redistricting. And gerrymandering is just a product. I mean, you need redistricting, but gerrymandering is just a manipulation of the redistricting process. We're having very difficult times in Harrisburg with Democrats and Republicans working together on solutions to issues. This last state budget was an example of how gridlocked we are. And we are convinced that it is because of the gerrymandering process that has polarized us. Meaning, if you're so comfortable and safe in your district and you don't have to worry about the voters ousting you because you're in a safe district, how does that make you work together with the opposite party? You know, in Pennsylvania, the redistricting process for Congress is done through legislation, which means the majority party, no matter which is in the majority party at the time, does not even consult with the minority party on a plan, on a redistricting plan. And it's kind of like an incumbency protection program as
Sure.
well.
Absolutely.
So you see
Representative-
these legislators tucked into these carved out political fiefdoms.
Representative Parker, what you're really asking for is an independent commission or an executive committee that can help redistricting in your state, as opposed to what most states do, leave it to state legislators.
Right, yeah, we're asking to create a citizens commission like they have in Arizona and California. And our bills are very similar. They would create a commission with 11 members. You would have 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and 3 independents. And the Secretary of State would be charged with setting that up.
Why should we be confident, even with a Democrat and Republican sitting down together, that true change is going to take place here? What's it going to take to convince this state, like many other states across the union, that it's time to get rid of state legislators drawing our maps, usually from one party, and get an independent commission in there instead?
Well, you're right. We can't hope to take the politics out of this process unless we take the politicians out of the redistricting process. And the thing is, I'm confident that we can make this change if the public is engaged and understands why this is so important. I mean, our redistricting process is the very foundation of competitive elections, a competitive legislature, and how competitive a legislature is going to be. It's the very rock, it's the foundation of a representative democracy. And I don't think the public truly understands what's at stake here. And as these programs educate individuals, I believe that the voters will rise up and demand this change. That's why we're here trying to promote this.
And Matt, it's hard enough to get people interested in senatorial or House representative elections nationally. But really what people need to be focusing on are their own state legislators, because again, they draw the maps. And in your research, Matt, you've got to find that wanting.
I agree. I think that people focus on, as we see this election, the 2016 cycle, on the president, and that's where most of the news coverage goes to, where most of the laws that affect people on a daily basis are the local laws with their state legislatures and the local governing bodies. I think that if people start paying attention to these issues, even though they're not the most exciting issues, but they're the fundamental parts of our democracy that makes this country run, and they're important. That's why I think engaging efforts like One Virginia 2021 and their new commercials and funny commercials and their new movies are a great way to engage the public in this effort.
I think it's important for people, for regular average people watching the system, to realize how this distorts democracy and thwarts democracy. Real quick, approximately 4 million Democrats, 3 million Republicans in Pennsylvania, 4 million to 3 million. We have 18 congressional districts. A fair redistricting of congressional seats would result in about 10 Democrats and 8 Republicans going to Washington to represent our state in a democratic way. But the Republicans in 2010 had the governor's mansion, they had the state Senate, they had the state House, and they had the Republican Supreme Court. They ran the table. They drew the districts. And you know what we have? We don't have 10 Democrats and 8 Republicans. We have 13 Republicans and 5 Democrats in Washington, representing a state where there's 4 million Democrats and 3 million Republicans. That's wrong, and it's un-American. It needs to change.
And that's the exact problem with having a legislature draw up the plans. In New Jersey, what we have is we have a commission, which is what we heard the senator and the representative propose, which is, a commission that has one independent neutral, and it has some Democrats, it has some Republicans, and really if there were independents in New Jersey that qualified as a political party, they would be placed on the commission as well. And then the appeals process for that goes to a judiciary that is completely neutral, that's unelected, which is another problem I think that will be faced in Pennsylvania and other states where they have elected judges.
I'm happy to see Representative Parker. You indicated that he was elected in 2014, so he wasn't at the crime scene in 2010 and 2011.
Representative Parker.
Well, no, in fact,
Hey.
and I'm actually in a district that was cut for a Democrat.
Well, Representative Parker, let me throw the question to you then. Do you think you're going to have a tougher road to hoe with your colleagues than Senator Boscola?
Yeah, and actually we had a hearing this past summer on the bill in the State Government Committee. And it was interesting, both the minority chairman and the majority chairman were opposed to the idea of having an unaccountable group draw the lines, because the Citizens Commission would be, quote, unaccountable. But there were a lot of good questions asked, and we got a lot of good feedback, and hopefully next session we can start off with the bill and get it through, because we have to get it through 2 consecutive sessions, both chambers, and then it would go to the people to vote because it'd be a constitutional amendment.
And bottom line is you've got to get this done before the next census, 2020, correct?
Right.
Absolutely. Yes. But the leaders that are drawing the maps don't want to make the change. If you had the power of the pen, would you want to change it? And that's what we have, 5 people, only 5 people with the power of the pen to determine these legislative districts. And that's what's so wrong.
Let me ask you folks one last question, because I have here the independent redistricting pledge. You folks are acting, you can find this on the ALJ Facebook page, by the way, folks. You're actually asking people to write candidates and tell them you want them to pledge that they're going to move in the direction of fair redistricting, right?
Correct. Because, you know, sometimes people talk about how there's so much for government reform when they're running for an election. Well, prove it. Show that you're in support of this major change, because I'm convinced that unless we have some kind of fairness in how we redistrict, that is probably the most important government reform change that we could ever ask for.
Senator Boscola and Representative David Parker, good luck. A bit of an uphill climb, but I'm very encouraged, again, to see Democrats and Republicans sitting down, trying to get something done, an eminently fair goal. I appreciate your efforts. Good luck.
Thank you.
All right, have a good evening. When we come back, we're going to take a look at what is high tech doing to carve out our districts in this country. Is it contributing to gerrymandering? And what if you're turned away from the polls this election season? We'll be back in a minute.
If you want your party to win it all, but a whole lot of voters say no, just withdraw those lines when it's election time. They're all cracked up, I'm cracking up.
This week's American Law Journal is made possible in part by Law Catalyst, video and film production for the legal profession. Go to lawcatalyst.com. King Spry, serving its Pennsylvania clients in family law, business, personal injury, and school law for over 30 years. Blank Rome, providing strategic advice for employers in today's workplace. And The Legal Intelligencer, an American lawyer media publication and the oldest law journal in the United States.
But I do think it's very difficult for us to try to draw these lines. There isn't any doubt that they're unsatisfactorily drawn, not only for the Congress, which is not the worst offender, but for state legislatures.
The House of Representatives has become a virtually permanent chamber.
No single factor is more basic to restoring competitive elections than ensuring fair redistricting.
I think we've got to end the practice of drawing our congressional districts so that politicians can pick their voters and not the other way around.
And that was a clip from the movie Gerryrigged, which was actually produced by One Virginia 2021. You can go to our Facebook page, find out more about that. I'm joined by Rajiv Parikh this evening from Genova Burns in the state of New Jersey, who's actually litigated in election matters. Matt Scoble is with us tonight from Common Cause, spending a lot of time these days in Pennsylvania and Virginia, where some really tough partisan gerrymandering is taking place. And George Beatty, you know him for his personal injury work, but also George ran for Congress in 2012 in that much gerrymandered district, the 7th Congressional District in Pennsylvania. So that movie, Matt, that's come out from One Virginia 2021, Gerryrigged. Again, I'm so encouraged to see PBS, a lot of PBS stations playing this across the nation. You were involved somewhat peripherally in that process, correct?
I was involved at the beginning of the organization. A great group of people came together and decided to advocate for redistricting reform in Virginia, kind of the same process that's going on in Pennsylvania right now, trying to advocate for a constitutional amendment to have a independent redistricting commission.
How do you make this sexy?
I think you have to make it simple. It's so wonky that somebody with their day-to-day lives, their busy lives, they don't really want to hear about it. They just want to know, how does it affect them? If you can show them, I think it relates competition. And people believe that competition brings out the best in people. Like we said, if there's a seat that you're almost unsure of winning, almost assured of winning, why would you challenge that person? Why would you step up to lose? And I think that undermines democracy in the process. People want the process to be fair, and I think that crosses the aisle. And I think if you, make democracy fair and open and transparent, like these groups are trying to do, I think that's how you relate to the general public and get this in their purview.
So, I mean, there are a lot of efforts across the country and not just in states. In fact, nationally, I think Eric Holder and the soon-to-be former President Obama are really trying to get a new movement going, again, which will make redistricting more fair across the country.
Right, I believe it's called the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, and Eric Holder's heading it up, and with help from the White House to set it up while President Obama is still president, and then after he leaves office. And the goal there is to create much more fairness in legislative bodies all around the country. And if you have more fairness and it's more representative of the people, that's what we're really trying to accomplish.
Right, and that's one of those things, which is that you have so many, almost the majority of state legislatures, governors are held by the Republican Party right now. And it's not that the majority of Americans are Republican or affiliate with the Republican Party. So the idea is to create fairness across the country so that the representative part of the democracy that we're all a part of actually comes to fruition.
George,
I think when you look at the situation in Washington, for example, gridlock. That's everybody can understand the gridlock that's going on. They shut down the government when they don't get their way on something. That is a product of gerrymandering, if you think about it a little bit more deeply. Because if these people who are at the far extreme of their party, where they have to be in a gerrymandered district, don't do crazy things like this, they could lose a primary just like Eric Cantor. So I think everybody that loves America should step back and say, we need to make this right. We need to make this fair. You shouldn't have a state like Pennsylvania with 13 Republicans and 5 Democrats when you have 4 million Democrats and 3 million Republicans. Something is inherently wrong with that.
And Matt, sometimes redistricting, though, is actually very helpful. In fact, we've kind of gotten in a little bit of trouble here in this country because in some ways we wanted to make sure that minorities weren't basically gerrymandered out of their one person, one vote. And yet some people have taken that license and have abused it.
Yeah, you see it in so many instances. I think redistricting is the process to make our elections fair and representative. As we saw the Evanwell case last year, the Supreme Court decided that everybody should be counted, not just the voting population. And I think that was a correct decision, is that the whole purpose of this thing is to make sure our entire population is represented. We saw this in Virginia in the 3rd District where it had to be redistricted because of racial gerrymandering. And now there's the opportunity to have more minority representation in Congress, which I think is a good thing.
You know, what's going to be hard, and that's why I wanted to pose this to Representative David Parker, is that right now, although both parties do benefit, nationally, Republicans have benefited more. 55% of the gerrymandered districts favor Republicans. I think it's only between 10 and 15% right now that are favoring Democrats. How do you get both parties on board with this? Because let's face it, if they redistrict the maps the way the people are voting right now, there's certainly going to be more Democrats in the House of Representatives.
We see a problem in Pennsylvania throughout the whole electoral process with the Republican Party. They passed voter ID. And they said, oh, it's a big problem of voter identification fraud. And that's not true. And even Mike Turzai, who's now the Republican Speaker of the House, was caught on tape admitting that the only reason they passed that law was to suppress Democratic voter turnout. So that's one example. Then there's early voting. We don't have that in Pennsylvania. We're primitive. The Republican legislature and Senate in Pennsylvania have done everything they could to suppress voter participation because they don't have enough Republicans to go around. And that's just anti-democratic, and it's wrong.
And part of the way to do that is to have Congress restore the Voting Rights Act. You know, we all know that the Voting Rights Act to some extent was gutted by the Supreme Court. Now that you have a 4-4 deadlock, there's, you know, a bunch of more redistricting cases, voting rights cases. You know, I agree voter fraud is absolutely a myth, but there's vote suppression cases that are before the Supreme Court. If they deadlock on these issues, you're going to have circuit splits throughout the country. You know, it's very interesting from a lawyer's perspective, but really fundamentally for the voters, this is not good.
And Matt, what we're finding is the states where there seems to be some success, these are grassroots, people-driven movements.
Correct. I think as you see from Arizona and in California, that's where you've had success. The places where there's ballot initiatives and referendums, you see the people moving to restore a more representative process. And the other states where you kind of have the power being held with the state and the representatives, they're holding on to the power rather than giving the power back to the people.
So we always see about people being fed up. We hate our politicians. We hate our candidates. There are no choices this year. And really, who's at the other end of this arm that keeps hitting us in the face? It's ourselves. We don't get involved in the process. I think Samantha Bee said it best in one of her programs. The most important election of your lifetime wasn't 2012 or 2008. It was 2010. It was that interim election. It's when there's not much on the line. Maybe a congressional race, maybe just your state legislators. But once again, for most people watching tonight, it's the state legislators that draw the maps, and that decides who ends up going to Congress. And if you get involved in the process, if we learn and we get involved in the process, maybe we're not so angry. Because we do have an angry electorate, let's face it.
At the end of the day, we're not Democrats or Republicans, we're Americans.
Let's talk a little bit about what could happen at the polls, because I know that some people have expressed some concern that what happens if you're turned away at the polls, if you're not allowed to vote on Election Day. And here are just a couple of pointers that my producer has come up with from various groups, including Matt Scoble's group, that if you do not leave the voting area until you have inquired why you have not been allowed to vote, do make sure that you've got the required photo ID or other required identification. If you're not in the poll book, the poll worker should call the Board of Elections for your state. And if you're still told you cannot vote, ask for a provisional ballot. Any other suggestions or advice you may give people who have problems?
So one of the things we always tell people is to make sure that they call a voter hotline. There's voter hotlines that are put on that are nonpartisan. The Democratic National Committee has a voter hotline based in Washington that anyone from any state can call. There are volunteer lawyers throughout the country that are there to help you figure out, what the process is in your state so that you have the ability to vote on an actual ballot instead of just a provisional ballot during Election Day.
Also, if you show up and you're standing at your polling place and you've been denied the right, just about every polling place there are going to be election workers for your party. Go up to one of your election workers, tell them the problem, and they will put you in touch with the person right then and there that could take care of the problem.
Great. For more information, you can always go to our Facebook page. Matt, let me leave the evening with the last question going to you. Are you confident that before 2020, groups such as your own are going to make a difference in this country, and we're going to see at least better, if not completely fair, redistricting in our future?
I think we're going to work as hard as possible to see that come to fruition. And I think groups like Common Cause and One Virginia 2021 are going to make this an issue, as much as they can.
Matt Scoble with Common Cause, thank you for joining us tonight. And Rajiv Parikh with Genova Burns, who's been involved in election litigation much in his career. And George Beatty, thanks a lot for joining us tonight. Again, congressional run in 2012 in a very gerrymandered district. For all of us here at the American Law Journal, thank you for joining this week. Till next Monday night, case closed.
This week's American Law Journal is made possible in part by Law Catalyst, video and film production for the legal profession. Go to lawcatalyst.com. King Spry, serving its Pennsylvania clients in family law, business, personal injury, and school law for over 30 years. Blank Rome, providing strategic advice for employers in today's workplace. And The Legal Intelligencer, an American lawyer media publication and the oldest law journal in the United States.